My 10-year-old grandson slapped me across the face, and my son laughed. My daughter-in-law clapped her hands and said, "See? He's just playing, Mom. Don't be so sensitive." I stood there, frozen, the sting on my cheek, nothing compared to the ache in my heart. The room was full, my family, their friends, laughter and music, but in that moment I felt utterly alone, as if the world had shrunk to a pinpoint of humiliation and disbelief. I looked at my son, searching his face for a sign of concern, a flicker of the boy I'd raised to be kind. But he just shook his head, grinning at his son's spirit, as if I were the one making a scene. My grandson, still smirking, turned away, already bored with the game. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, tried to remind myself that I was the adult, that I shouldn't let a child's thoughtless act undo me. But it wasn't just the slap. It was the laughter, the applause, the way my daughter-in-law's eyes sparkled with something cold and triumphant. She leaned in close, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You know, maybe if you'd learned to take a joke, you wouldn't be so lonely now." The words landed harder than the slap, echoing in my mind long after the party moved on. I felt my face flush, not just from pain, but from shame. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the wallpaper, to run out the door and never look back. But I stayed, rooted to the spot, my hands trembling as I tried to hold on to my dignity. No one else seemed to notice. The conversation flowed around me, easy and bright, as if nothing had happened. My son poured another drink, my grandson darted off to play, and my daughter-in-law returned to her friends, her laughter ringing out like a bell. I stood there, invisible, the ghost at my own family's table. I thought about all the years I'd spent loving them, sacrificing for them, putting their needs before my own. I thought about the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the birthday cakes baked from scratch. I thought about the long nights waiting up for my son, the tears I'd wiped away, the dreams I'd set aside so he could chase his own. And now, here I was, a punchline in their private joke, a relic to be tolerated, not cherished. What would you do if your own family treated you this way? Would you speak up, risk making things worse, or would you swallow your pride and pretend it didn't matter? I did nothing. I stood there, silent, my heart pounding, my mind racing with 1,000 things I wished I could say. But the words caught in my throat, and I let the moment pass, telling myself it was just one more indignity in a long line of small betrayals. But what my daughter-in-law said next changed everything. I excused myself, retreating to the quiet of the guest room, my hands shaking as I closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the scene over and over, wondering how we had come to this, how love could curdle into something so sharp, so cold. I stared at my reflection in the window, searching for the woman I used to be, the woman who once believed family meant safety, respect, and love. As the laughter drifted down the hallway, I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to understand how my family had become strangers, how my own home had become a place of pain. And so I began to remember, tracing the path that led us here, to this moment of heartbreak and silence. There was a time when my world was small but full, just me and my son, Daniel, in a little yellow house at the end of Maple Lane. I was a single mother, not by choice but by necessity, after Daniel's father left us when he was barely 3. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep the lights on and food on the table. I learned to stretch every dollar, to mend clothes and bake bread from scratch, to make Christmas magical with paper snowflakes and homemade gifts. Daniel never seemed to notice what we lacked. He was a bright, affectionate boy, quick to laugh and quicker to forgive. We had our rituals, pancakes every Sunday, movie nights on Fridays, and long walks in the park where he'd tell me his dreams and I'd promise him the world. Those years were hard, but they were golden. I was tired, yes, but I was needed. Daniel would run to me with every scraped knee, every school project, every secret. I was his safe place, his anchor. I remember the way he'd squeeze my hand before crossing the street, the way he'd curl up beside me on stormy nights, whispering, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll always take care of you." I believed him. I believed in us. As Daniel grew, so did my pride. He was the first in our family to go to college, and I worked overtime to help pay his tuition. I cheered at his graduation, tears streaming down my face, and hugged him so tightly he laughed and said I was embarrassing him. But he never let go first. Even as a young man, he called me every week, visited often, and always remembered my birthday. When he landed his first job, he took me out to dinner, just the two of us, like old times. He told me, "None of this would have happened without you, Mom." My heart nearly burst. Then he met Olivia. She was beautiful, polished, and confident in a way I'd never been. The first time Daniel brought her home, I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I cooked her favorite meal, chicken piccata, Daniel said, and set the table with my best china. Olivia smiled politely, complimented the food, but her eyes kept drifting to her phone. She asked Daniel about his work, their upcoming trip, her new yoga class. She barely looked at me. I told myself it was nerves, that she'd warm up in time, but time only made things colder. After they married, Daniel's calls grew less frequent. Visits were shorter, always squeezed between Olivia's appointments or her parents' events. When they did come, Olivia would bring her own food, citing dietary restrictions, and gently suggest that Daniel and I catch up while she took a call in the other room. She redecorated their home in cool grays and whites, replacing the family photos I'd given them with abstract art and designer vases. My gifts, hand-knit blankets, framed pictures, homemade cookies, were met with tight smiles and set aside, never to be seen again. The first Christmas after their wedding, I spent alone. Daniel called, apologizing, saying Olivia's family had planned a ski trip and it was just easier for everyone. I told him I understood, but after I hung up, I sat in the dark, listening to the echo of laughter from the neighbors' houses, wondering when I'd become an afterthought. When their son, Ethan, was born, I hoped things would change. I dreamed of being the kind of grandmother who bakes cookies, tells stories, and is greeted with squeals of delight. For a while it seemed possible. Daniel would bring Ethan over on Saturday mornings, and we'd build towers out of blocks, read picture books, and make pancakes just like I used to with Daniel. But Olivia rarely joined us, and when she did, she hovered, correcting the way I held Ethan, the way I spoke to him, even the way I folded his clothes. "We don't use that kind of language," she'd say if I called him sweetheart or pumpkin. "He's not a baby anymore." As Ethan grew, the visits dwindled. Olivia enrolled him in endless activities, soccer, piano, Mandarin lessons. There was always a reason I couldn't see him. When I did, he was restless, distracted, more interested in his tablet than in me. I tried to connect, to find common ground, but Olivia's rules were everywhere. No sugar, no TV, no old-fashioned stories. I felt like a guest in my own family, tiptoeing around invisible boundaries. The warmth of the past faded into the chill of the present. Family gatherings became tense affairs, with Olivia orchestrating every detail and Daniel following her lead. I was given tasks, set the table, watch the kids, clean up after dinner, but never included in the real conversations. My opinions were dismissed, my stories interrupted, my presence tolerated, but never truly welcomed. I started to notice the little ways Olivia undermined me. She'd correct me in front of Ethan, rolling her eyes when I forgot one of her rules. She'd tell Daniel I was old-fashioned, or set in my ways, and he'd laugh, not realizing the sting in her words. Ethan picked up on it too. He stopped hugging me, stopped saying "I love you," started mimicking Olivia's tone. "Grandma, you're so silly," he'd say, and Olivia would smile as if he'd done something clever. I tried to talk to Daniel, to tell him how I felt, but he brushed it off. "Mom, you're overreacting. Olivia's just particular. She wants what's best for Ethan." I nodded, swallowing my hurt, telling myself it was just a phase, that things would get better, but they didn't. The distance grew. The coldness deepened, and I found myself more alone than ever. I filled my days with volunteering, gardening, and long walks, anything to keep the loneliness at bay. But every night as I sat in my quiet house, I wondered what I'd done wrong. How did a loving family become so divided? What secrets were hidden behind the closed doors of my son's home? The answer came to me one afternoon, when I arrived early for Ethan's birthday party and overheard Olivia on the phone, her voice sharp and dismissive. "She's just here for show. Daniel feels guilty if we don't invite her." "Don't worry, she won't be around much longer." I have a plan. My heart pounded as I realized, for the first time, that Olivia wasn't just indifferent. She was actively turning my son and grandson against me. That was the moment everything changed. I stood in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob, the words I'd just heard echoing in my ears. Olivia's voice, sharp and certain, cut through the laughter and music drifting from the living room. "She's just here for show. Daniel feels guilty if we don't invite her. Don't worry, she won't be around much longer. I have a plan." I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misunderstood, if I was reading too much into a private conversation. But the tone in Olivia's voice was unmistakable, dismissive, calculating, and cold. I pressed myself against the wall, hidden from view, and listened as she continued. "No, she doesn't know anything. She's clueless. Daniel will do whatever I say, he always does. Once the paperwork is done, she'll have no reason to come around. I'm tired of pretending." There was a pause, then a low laugh. "Honestly, I don't know how she lasted this long. She's so desperate for attention. It's almost sad." My hands trembled as I backed away, careful not to make a sound. I felt like an intruder in my own family, a ghost haunting the edges of a life I'd built with love and sacrifice. I wanted to burst into the room, to demand answers, to make Olivia look me in the eye and explain herself. But I knew deep down that confrontation would only give her more ammunition. She'd twist my words, make me out to be the problem, and Daniel would take her side. He always did. I retreated to the guest room, closing the door softly behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Was it all a misunderstanding, or something much worse? Had I really become so invisible, so irrelevant, that my own family could plot against me in my presence? I replayed every interaction, every slight, every moment when Olivia had smiled at me with that cold, knowing look. The pieces began to fit together in ways I hadn't wanted to see. I thought about the finances, how Daniel had asked me to sign some documents for convenience after Ethan was born, how Olivia had insisted on handling the bills and the family trust. I remembered the way they'd stopped inviting me to family meetings, the way my questions about money were brushed aside. "Don't worry, Mom, we've got it covered," Daniel would say, his tone gentle but final. I'd trusted him, trusted them both, because that's what family does. But now, doubt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. I wiped my eyes, refusing to let myself cry. I needed answers, not tears. I needed to know what Olivia was planning, what she meant by the paperwork, what she was hiding from me. I decided right then and there that I would stop being a bystander in my own life. I would watch, listen, and document everything. If they wanted to cut me out, they would have to do it in the light, not in the shadows. That night, I started a journal. I wrote down everything I could remember: conversations, dates, the way Olivia looked at me, the way Daniel avoided my questions. I made copies of every document I could find, every email, every text message that seemed odd. I paid attention to the way Ethan acted around me, the way he parroted Olivia's words, the way he seemed to pull away whenever she was near. The more I observed, the more I saw. Olivia was careful, but not perfect. She made calls late at night, whispered in corners, and kept a locked drawer in her home office. Daniel, for his part, seemed tired, distracted, as if he were carrying a burden he couldn't name. I wondered if he knew what Olivia was doing, or if he was just as lost as I was. I started to notice the way money moved in the house: new furniture, expensive vacations, gifts for Olivia's family, but never for mine. I remembered the trust fund my parents had left for Ethan, the one I'd managed until Daniel and Olivia insisted it would be simpler if they took over. I realized, with a sick feeling, that I hadn't seen a statement in months. What would you do if you heard your own family plotting against you? Would you confront them, risk being cast out completely, or would you gather your strength and wait for the right moment? I chose patience, not because I was weak, but because I needed to be sure. I needed proof. I needed to protect what little I had left. As the days passed, I became a shadow in my own home, watching, waiting, collecting evidence. I smiled when Olivia expected me to, played the part of the grateful grandmother, and kept my true feelings hidden. But inside, a quiet resolve was growing. I would not let them erase me. I would not let them steal my place in my family, my dignity or my future. And so I waited, journal in hand, for the moment when the truth would come to light. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm with no shelter. Every morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, bracing myself for whatever new slight or humiliation the day would bring. Ethan, once my sweet, curious grandson, had become almost unrecognizable. He mimicked Olivia's dismissive tone, rolling his eyes when I spoke, ignoring my attempts to connect. If I offered to help with his homework, he'd snap, "Mom says you don't know how to do it right." If I tried to hug him, he'd squirm away, glancing at Olivia for approval. Daniel, too, seemed to drift further from me with each passing week. He was always busy, always tired, always just out of reach. When I called, he'd answer with a distracted, "Hey, Mom," and end the conversation as quickly as possible. When I visited, he'd disappear into his office or out to run errands, leaving me alone with Olivia and Ethan. I tried to tell myself he was just overwhelmed, that work and family life were taking their toll. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The boy who once promised to take care of me now barely saw me at all. Olivia, for her part, had stopped pretending altogether. Her cruelty was no longer hidden behind polite smiles or whispered comments. She corrected me in front of guests, rolled her eyes when I spoke, and made a point of excluding me from every decision. "We're planning Ethan's birthday party," she'd say, her voice syrupy sweet, "but it's really just for his friends. You wouldn't know any of the parents, so you don't need to come." Or, "We're redecorating the living room, but Daniel and I have it covered. You wouldn't understand the style we're going for." Each word was a small cut, a reminder that I was no longer welcome, no longer needed. Family gatherings became a minefield. At Thanksgiving, Olivia seated me at the far end of the table, away from Daniel and Ethan, next to a group of distant relatives I barely knew. When I tried to join a conversation, Olivia would interrupt, steering the topic away or making a joke at my expense. "Oh, you know how old people are," she'd say, laughing as if I were in on it. Daniel would smile weakly, never meeting my eyes, and Ethan would snicker, emboldened by his mother's example. I started to doubt myself. Was I really so out of touch, so difficult, so embarrassing? Olivia was a master at gaslighting, twisting my words and memories until I questioned my own reality. If I brought up a promise Daniel had made, she'd insist, "That never happened." "You must be confused. If I mentioned a family tradition," she'd say, "We don't do things that way anymore." Times have changed. I felt myself shrinking, my confidence eroding with every encounter. At night, I lay awake replaying the past, searching for the moment when everything changed. I remembered the warmth of Daniel's childhood, the laughter that filled our little house, the way he'd run to me with open arms. I remembered the pride I felt at his graduation, the joy of holding Ethan for the first time. Those memories felt like another life, a world I could never return to. The contrast between then and now was almost unbearable. But even as the pain grew, so did my resolve. I wrote everything down in my journal, every slight, every cruel word, every moment of exclusion. I started to see patterns, to understand the ways Olivia manipulated not just me, but Daniel and Ethan as well. I realized that her power came from isolation, from making me feel alone and powerless. But I wasn't powerless. I still had my mind, my memories, and my determination. One afternoon, as I sat in the park watching other families play, I made a decision. I would not let Olivia erase me. I would not let her rewrite the story of my life or my family. I would gather my strength, bide my time, and wait for the moment when I could reclaim my place. Every slight brought me closer to the breaking point, but it also brought me closer to the truth. And then, one evening, as I was tidying up after dinner, I stumbled upon something that made my heart race. A bank statement, left carelessly on the kitchen counter with numbers that didn't add up. My hands shook as I read through the transactions, realizing that something was very wrong. But what I uncovered next would shock me to the core. I stared at the bank statement, my breath catching as I traced the unfamiliar withdrawals and transfers. There were large sums moving out of an account I recognized, one that had once been in my name, meant for Ethan's future, for college, for emergencies. Now it seemed the money was vanishing bit by bit, each transaction signed off by Daniel, or more often, by Olivia. My mind raced back to the day Daniel had asked me to sign just a few forms to make things easier. I'd trusted him, never imagining that trust could be twisted into something so cold. I slipped the statement into my purse, my hands trembling. I knew I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. That night I waited until the house was quiet, then crept into the home office. The drawers were locked, but I remembered where Daniel kept the spare key. My heart pounded as I opened the files, scanning through folders labeled Family Trust, College Fund, Household Expenses. The deeper I looked, the more I found: forged signatures, missing statements, and a pattern of withdrawals that matched the dates of Olivia's shopping sprees and their family vacations. Vacations I was never invited to. The betrayal was staggering. I felt a wave of nausea, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. This wasn't just about being excluded from birthday parties or family dinners. This was about erasure, about being written out of my own family's future, my sacrifices turned into someone else's spending money. I thought of the years I'd spent working overtime, skipping meals, saving every penny so Daniel and Ethan would have security. Now it was all slipping away, and I was the only one who seemed to care. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but Olivia's eyes lingered on me a little too long, as if she sensed a shift. She was sharper than ever, correcting me in front of Ethan, making snide comments about old people and their paranoia. Daniel barely looked up from his phone, lost in his own world. Ethan, emboldened by his mother's open disdain, started to mimic her more openly. He rolled his eyes, ignored my questions, and once, when I asked for a hug, he shrugged and said, "Mom says you're too needy." The humiliation was relentless. At a family barbecue, Olivia made a show of giving me a special seat far from the main table, then joked loudly about how I liked to watch from the sidelines. Daniel laughed along, and Ethan joined in, their laughter ringing in my ears long after the party ended. I felt invisible, erased, a ghost haunting the edges of their lives, but I refused to let them see me break. I kept my head high, smiled when expected, and wrote everything down. I started making copies of every document I found, storing them in a folder at home. I reached out to an old friend, Linda, who had worked as a paralegal for years. She listened quietly as I explained what I'd found, then promised to help me make sense of the paperwork. "You're not crazy," she said, her voice firm. "You're being taken advantage of. But you're not alone." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few months. Every slight, every cruel word, every act of exclusion had brought me to this point. I realized that Olivia's power came from making me doubt myself, from isolating me, from convincing everyone, including Daniel and Ethan, that I was the problem. But now I had something she didn't expect: the truth. I started to see Olivia's behavior for what it was: a campaign to erase me, to take everything I'd built and claim it as her own. But I also saw my own strength, the quiet resilience that had carried me through years of hardship. I wasn't the helpless, needy woman Olivia wanted me to be. I was a mother, a grandmother, and a fighter. Every slight had brought me closer to the breaking point, but it had also brought me closer to the moment when I would take back my power. I was done being a bystander in my own life. I was ready to fight for my place, for my dignity, for the future I'd worked so hard to build. And as I tucked the folder of evidence into my bag, I knew that the next step would change everything. The secret I'd uncovered was bigger than I'd imagined, and it gave me the leverage I needed. The time for silence was over. The time for truth had come. I sat at my kitchen table, the folder of copied documents spread out before me like the pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. The numbers, the signatures, the dates, they all told a story I could no longer ignore. Olivia hadn't just been cruel or dismissive. She had been methodical, deliberate, and ruthless. The trust fund my parents had left for Ethan, the savings I'd scraped together for Daniel's future, even the deed to my own home. Everything was being siphoned away, bit by bit, into accounts I'd never seen. for purposes I'd never approved. I felt grief, yes, a deep, aching sorrow for the years of sacrifice that had been twisted into someone else's gain. But beneath the grief, something else began to burn: fury. How dare she? How dare Olivia look me in the eye, call me Mom, and then steal from me with a smile? How dare Daniel, my own son, let it happen, whether through ignorance or willful blindness? I thought of all the times I'd trusted him, all the times I'd signed my name because he asked, never imagining he'd let someone use it against me. I needed help. I needed someone who could see through the legal jargon, who could tell me what was real and what was forgery. I called Linda, my old friend from church, who had spent decades as a paralegal before retiring. She came over that afternoon, her arms full of notepads and highlighters, her eyes sharp with concern. I poured us tea, my hands shaking, and told her everything, every slight, every suspicion, every document I'd found. Linda listened without interrupting, her face growing grimmer as I spoke. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not crazy," she said. "You're not imagining things. This is fraud, plain and simple. And if you let me, I'll help you prove it." We spent hours going through the paperwork, matching signatures, tracing transactions, building a timeline of Olivia's schemes. Linda showed me how to request official copies of the trust documents, how to check the county records for changes to the deed, how to track the flow of money from one account to another. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Olivia had been planning this for years, slowly isolating me, convincing Daniel to take control, and then siphoning off everything I'd worked for. The betrayal was staggering. I thought of the holidays spent alone, the birthdays missed, the laughter that had turned to mockery. I thought of Ethan, growing up in a house where love was measured in gifts and approval, not hugs and bedtime stories. I thought of Daniel, the boy who once promised to take care of me, now lost in a fog of work and obligation, blind to the woman he'd married. But I refused to let grief win. I refused to let Olivia's cruelty define the rest of my life. I was done being silent, done being erased. I was ready to fight back. Linda and I made a plan. We would gather every piece of evidence, document every transaction, and prepare a case strong enough to withstand any denial or manipulation. Linda reached out to a lawyer she trusted, a woman named Ms. Patel, who specialized in elder law and financial abuse. Ms. Patel agreed to meet with us, and when I showed her the folder of documents, her eyes narrowed with determination. "This is serious," she said, "but you have a strong case. The courts take this kind of abuse very seriously, especially when it involves family trusts and property. The key is to keep gathering evidence and not to tip your hand until you're ready." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. I had allies, women who believed me, who saw the truth, who were willing to stand by my side. I started to feel the old strength returning, the quiet resilience that had carried me through years of hardship. But I also knew the risks. If Olivia found out what I was doing, she would do everything in her power to stop me. She might try to move the money, destroy the documents, or turn Daniel and Ethan against me even more. I had to be careful, patient, and strategic. I began to play the part Olivia expected, the quiet, grateful grandmother, the woman too old and tired to notice what was happening around her. I smiled when she made her little jokes, nodded when Daniel brushed me off, and kept my true feelings hidden behind a mask of politeness. But inside, I was watching, listening, and documenting everything. Every time Olivia made a withdrawal, I made a note. Every time Daniel asked me to sign something, I took a photo. Every time Ethan repeated one of Olivia's cruel phrases, I wrote it down. I started to see the patterns, the ways Olivia manipulated not just me, but everyone around her. She was clever, but she wasn't invincible. Linda and Ms. Patel helped me file a formal complaint with the bank, freezing the accounts until the matter could be investigated. We gathered statements from neighbors who had seen Olivia forging my signature, from friends who had witnessed her belittling me in public. We built a case so strong that even Daniel would have to see the truth. Could someone you trust betray you so completely? I never thought it would happen to me, but as I looked at the evidence, at the years of love and sacrifice turned into weapons against me, I knew I had no choice but to fight. I was about to risk everything for the truth, my home, my family, my future, but I was ready. I was stronger than Olivia knew, and as I prepared my response, gathering every scrap of evidence, every memory of love and loss, I knew that the time for silence was over. The time for justice had come. I became a student of my own life, watching every detail with a new, sharper eye. Linda and Ms. Patel guided me through each step, reminding me that patience was my greatest weapon. I learned to move quietly, to smile when Olivia expected it, to nod along with Daniel's distracted reassurances, all while building a case that would stand up to any scrutiny. Every day I played the part of the grateful, harmless grandmother, the one who didn't understand modern finances or complicated family matters. But inside I was gathering strength, and every slight only made my resolve harder. Linda helped me organize the evidence into a timeline, color-coding each transaction, each forged signature, each moment of humiliation. We made copies of everything: bank statements, trust documents, emails, even text messages that Olivia had carelessly left open on the family computer. Ms. Patel explained how to request surveillance footage from the bank, how to document every interaction with Daniel and Olivia, and how to keep a log of every time I was asked to sign something new. I kept a small notebook in my purse, jotting down dates, times, and details, no matter how small. The more I wrote, the more the pattern emerged. Olivia's campaign to erase me was as systematic as it was cruel. The hardest part was pretending. I had to act as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't seen the bank statement or discovered the missing funds. I had to let Olivia believe she was still in control, still the clever puppet master pulling all the strings. At family dinners, I laughed at her jokes, accepted her backhanded compliments, and let her seat me at the far end of the table. I let Daniel believe I was just tired, just grateful to be included, just happy to see Ethan, even as I watched my grandson slip further away, his affection replaced by mimicry and indifference. But every time Olivia slipped up, every time she let her mask drop, I was ready. I recorded her snide remarks on my phone, saved voicemails where she reminded me not to meddle, and took photos of documents she left out in the open. Linda and I met in secret, reviewing the evidence, double-checking every detail. Ms. Patel prepared the legal paperwork, ready to file the moment we had enough to make our case airtight. The tension in the house grew with every passing day. Olivia became more brazen, more careless, as if she believed her victory was inevitable. She started talking openly about downsizing the family home, about moving to a new city for Daniel's job, about how some people needed to learn to let go. Daniel, lost in his own world, barely noticed the shift. Ethan, caught between loyalty and confusion, grew sullen and withdrawn. I watched it all, my heart breaking and hardening at the same time. I missed the days when love was simple, when family meant safety and warmth. But I also knew that the only way to reclaim my place was to fight for it, to use every ounce of intelligence and patience I had left. Linda and Ms. Patel encouraged me to set a trap, a moment when Olivia would reveal herself, when her arrogance would be her undoing. We decided to arrange a family meeting, under the guise of discussing Ethan's future and the family finances. I sent out invitations, careful to make it sound like a routine gathering, nothing out of the ordinary. Olivia accepted immediately, eager to show off her control. Daniel agreed, distracted but compliant. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. In the days leading up to the meeting, I made sure to act as normal as possible. I baked cookies for Ethan, complimented Olivia's new haircut, and asked Daniel about his work. I let them believe I was still the same woman they'd underestimated for years. But inside I was ready. I had the evidence, the support, and the plan. The night before the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the folder one last time. Linda called to check in, her voice steady and reassuring. "You've done everything right," she said. "You're ready. No matter what happens tomorrow, you've already won by refusing to be erased." I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. Would Olivia sense the trap? Would Daniel finally see the truth? Would Ethan ever forgive me for shattering the illusion of our family? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't go back. The evidence I'd gathered could destroy my family, or save my future. The risk was enormous, but so was the cost of silence. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, choosing a blouse Daniel had given me years ago, a small reminder of the love we once shared. I set out coffee and pastries, arranged the documents in a neat stack, and took a deep breath. As the clock ticked closer to noon, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I was no longer afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next. When Olivia, Daniel, and Ethan arrived, I greeted them with a smile, my heart pounding, but my hands steady. We sat around the dining table, the air thick with unspoken tension. Olivia launched into her usual monologue about the family's future, her plans for the house, her vision for Ethan's education. Daniel nodded along, barely listening. Ethan scrolled on his phone, oblivious. I waited until Olivia paused for breath, then slid the folder across the table. "I think it's time we talked about what's really been happening," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. Olivia's eyes narrowed, Daniel looked confused, and Ethan finally looked up. With evidence in hand, I was ready to confront the truth. The moment I'd been preparing for was here, and there was no turning back. The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I looked at each of them, my son, my grandson, my daughter-in-law, and for a moment I saw them as strangers. Olivia's eyes flickered with annoyance, Daniel's with confusion, Ethan's with the blankness of a child who's learned to tune out the adults. My hands didn't shake as I opened the folder. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, but nothing could prepare me for the ache in my chest as I began. "I want you all to listen," I said, my voice steady. "I want you to really hear me, because I don't know if I'll ever have the strength to say this again." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Is this about the house again?" "We've been over this, Mom. Daniel and I are handling things." I ignored her, turning to Daniel. "Do you remember when you asked me to sign those papers after Ethan was born? You said it was just to make things easier. I trusted you. I always have, but I never imagined that trust would be used against me." Daniel frowned, glancing at Olivia. "What are you talking about?" I slid the first document across the table, a copy of the trust fund statement with withdrawals and transfers highlighted. "This is Ethan's college fund, the one my parents left for him. Look at the dates, Daniel. Look at the signatures. Most of them aren't mine." Olivia's face tightened. "You're being dramatic. We needed that money for the house, for Ethan's activities. You said yourself you wanted what was best for him." I met her gaze, refusing to look away. "What's best for him is honesty. What's best for him is knowing that his family doesn't lie, doesn't steal, doesn't erase the people who love him." Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. I didn't know. Olivia said you agreed to everything. She said you wanted us to take care of it." I felt a wave of sadness, but also a strange relief. "I never agreed to any of this. I trusted you, Daniel. I trusted you to protect what mattered, not to hand it over to someone who only sees me as an obstacle." Olivia's mask began to slip. Her voice rose, brittle and sharp. "You're just bitter because you can't control everything anymore. Times change. Families change. You should be grateful we let you be part of Ethan's life at all." Ethan looked up, his eyes wide. "Mom?" I turned to him, my heart breaking. "Ethan, I love you. I always have. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting people hurt you or letting them hurt others. I want you to know the truth, even if it's hard." Daniel's face was pale. "Olivia, is this true? Did you forge Mom's signature? Did you take the money?" Olivia's lips curled into a sneer. "You're so gullible, Daniel. You never wanted to deal with any of this. You let me handle everything because it was easier. Don't blame me for doing what needed to be done. I felt the years of pain, the nights spent alone, the holidays missed, the laughter that had turned to silence. I let it all rise up, not as anger but as strength. I am not invisible. I am not a burden. I am your mother. I am Ethan's grandmother. And I will not be erased." Olivia stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're pathetic. You're just an old woman clinging to the past." "Daniel, are you really going to let her ruin everything we've built?" Daniel looked at me, then at Olivia, torn. I don't know what to think. "I trusted you, Olivia. I trusted you with everything." I reached for his hand, my voice trembling. "You can still do the right thing, Daniel. You can still choose honesty. You can still choose family. Ethan's voice was small. Dad? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have listened. I should have paid attention. I just wanted everyone to be happy. Olivia's anger boiled over. You're all fools. You think you can just undo everything? You think you can take it all back? Fine, take your precious money. Take your old house. See if I care. I stood, feeling taller than I had in years. It was never about the money, Olivia. It was about respect. It was about love. It was about not letting anyone, no matter how clever or cruel, destroy what matters most. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that could never be unsaid. Daniel wept quietly. Ethan stared at the table, and Olivia glared at me with a hatred that no longer frightened me. Inside, I felt a strange peace. I had spoken my truth. I had faced the people who hurt me and refused to be silent. I had risked everything for the chance to be seen, to be heard, to be whole. Will your son stand by his wife or his mother? What would you do if your own child doubted you? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the family I once knew sat in ruins around me. But I knew this was not the end. The confrontation had stripped away every illusion, every lie, every mask. What came next would decide the future, not just for me, but for all of us. As I gathered my papers and stood to leave, I looked at Daniel and Ethan one last time. I love you both. I always will. But I will never let anyone erase me again. The door closed behind me with a quiet finality, and I stepped into the unknown, my heart heavy but unbroken, ready for whatever came next. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, each second stretching out like a thread about to snap. I looked at each of them, my son, my grandson, my daughter-in-law, and for a moment I saw them as strangers. Olivia's eyes flickered with annoyance, Daniel's with confusion, Ethan's with the blankness of a child who's learned to tune out the adults. My hands didn't shake as I opened the folder. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, but nothing could prepare me for the ache in my chest as I began. I want you all to listen, I said, my voice steady. I want you to really hear me, because I don't know if I'll ever have the strength to say this again. Olivia rolled her eyes. Is this about the house again? We've been over this, Mom. Daniel and I are handling things. I ignored her, turning to Daniel. Do you remember when you asked me to sign those papers after Ethan was born? You said it was just to make things easier. I trusted you. I always have. But I never imagined that trust would be used against me. Daniel frowned, glancing at Olivia. What are you talking about? I slid the first document across the table, a copy of the trust fund statement with withdrawals and transfers highlighted. This is Ethan's college fund. The one my parents left for him. Look at the dates, Daniel. Look at the signatures. Most of them aren't mine. Olivia's face tightened. You're being dramatic. We needed that money for the house, for Ethan's activities. You said yourself you wanted what was best for him. I met her gaze, refusing to look away. What's best for him is honesty. What's best for him is knowing that his family doesn't lie, doesn't steal, doesn't erase the people who love him. Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. I didn't know. Olivia said you agreed to everything. She said you wanted us to take care of it. I felt a wave of sadness, but also a strange relief. I never agreed to any of this. I trusted you, Daniel. I trusted you to protect what mattered, not to hand it over to someone who only sees me as an obstacle. Olivia's mask began to slip. Her voice rose brittle and sharp. You're just bitter because you can't control everything anymore. Times change. Families change. You should be grateful we let you be part of Ethan's life at all. Ethan looked up, his eyes wide. Mom? I turned to him, my heart breaking. Ethan, I love you. I always have. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting people hurt you or letting them hurt others. I want you to know the truth, even if it's hard. Daniel's face was pale. Olivia, is this true? Did you forge Mom's signature? Did you take the money? Olivia's lips curled into a sneer. You're so gullible, Daniel. You never wanted to deal with any of this. You let me handle everything because it was easier. Don't blame me for doing what needed to be done. I felt the years of pain, the nights spent alone, the holidays missed, the laughter that had turned to silence. I let it all rise up, not as anger, but as strength. I am not invisible. I am not a burden. I am your mother. I am Ethan's grandmother, and I will not be erased. Olivia stood, her chair scraping against the floor. You're pathetic. You're just an old woman clinging to the past. Daniel, are you really going to let her ruin everything we've built? Daniel looked at me, then at Olivia, torn. I don't know what to think. I trusted you, Olivia. I trusted you with everything. I reached for his hand, my voice trembling. You can still do the right thing, Daniel. You can still choose honesty. You can still choose family. Ethan's voice was small. Dad? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have listened. I should have paid attention. I just wanted everyone to be happy. Olivia's anger boiled over. You're all fools. You think you can just undo everything? You think you can take it all back? Fine. Take your precious money. Take your old house. See if I care. I stood, feeling taller than I had in years. It was never about the money, Olivia. It was about respect. It was about love. It was about not letting anyone, no matter how clever or cruel, destroy what matters most. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that could never be unsaid. Daniel wept quietly, Ethan stared at the table, and Olivia glared at me with a hatred that no longer frightened me. But the confrontation was far from over. Olivia's mask had slipped, but she wasn't done fighting. She turned on Daniel, her voice sharp and cold. You're really going to let her do this? After everything I've done for you? For Ethan? You think you can just throw me away? Daniel shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to think anymore. I just know I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Olivia's eyes narrowed. You're weak. Both of you. You always have been. That's why you needed me. I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my voice calm. No, Olivia. We needed each other, but you chose to use that need as a weapon. You chose to hurt, to take, to erase. That's on you, she laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think you're so righteous. You think you're the victim, but you're just a lonely old woman who can't accept that her time is over. I looked at Ethan, who was watching us with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, you are loved. You are not responsible for the choices adults make, but you do get to choose what kind of person you want to be. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know. I smiled at him, my heart aching. It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Olivia slammed her hand on the table. Enough. I'm done with this. If you want to take it to court, go ahead. But you'll regret it. I promise you that. I met her gaze unflinching. Maybe I will. But I'd rather lose everything than keep living a lie. Daniel finally spoke, his voice stronger than before. Olivia, I think you should leave. I need time to think. We all do. She stared at him, disbelief and fury warring on her face. You're choosing her over me? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm choosing the truth. I'm choosing my family. Olivia grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, a final punctuation mark on years of pain and silence. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I sat back down, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Daniel reached for my hand, his grip tight and desperate. I'm so sorry, Mom. I let you down. I let Ethan down. I let myself down. I squeezed his hand, my own tears falling. We all make mistakes, Daniel. What matters is what we do next. Ethan came around the table and hugged me, his arms tight around my shoulders. I love you, Grandma. I'm sorry I was mean. I held him close, my heart full. I love you too, Ethan. More than you'll ever know. We sat together, the three of us, in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The future was uncertain, the wounds still raw, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. I had spoken my truth. I had faced the people who hurt me and refused to be silent. I had risked everything for the chance to be seen, to be heard, to be whole. Will your son stand by his wife or his mother? What would you do if your own child doubted you? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the family I once knew sat in ruins around me. But I knew this was not the end. The confrontation had stripped away every illusion, every lie, every mask. What came next would decide the future, not just for me, but for all of us. As I gathered my papers and stood to leave, I looked at Daniel and Ethan one last time. I love you both. I always will. But I will never let anyone erase me again. The door closed behind me with a quiet finality, and I stepped into the unknown, my heart heavy but unbroken, ready for whatever came next. The days after the confrontation passed in a haze of exhaustion and uncertainty. Olivia's departure left a silence in the house that was both a relief and a wound. Daniel moved through the rooms like a man waking from a long, troubled dream, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice soft and uncertain. Ethan clung to me, seeking comfort in the routines we'd once shared: pancakes in the morning, stories at night, quiet walks in the park. I tried to be strong for him, but inside I was unraveling, the weight of years of betrayal pressing down on me. But the truth once spoken has a way of gathering momentum. Linda and Ms. Patel moved quickly, filing the necessary paperwork to freeze the family accounts and begin a formal investigation. The bank confirmed the forged signatures and unauthorized withdrawals. The trust fund was restored, and the deed to my house was returned to my name. Olivia, confronted with the evidence, tried to bluster and threaten, but the law was not on her side. She was forced to confess, first to Daniel, then to the authorities. The police opened a case for financial fraud, and Olivia's reputation in the community crumbled almost overnight. Word spread quickly. Friends who had once admired Olivia's poise and charm now crossed the street to avoid her. Her parents, who had always looked down on me, called to apologize, their voices thick with shame. Even Ethan's teachers, who had witnessed Olivia's controlling ways, reached out to offer support. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a burden or an afterthought, but as a woman who had fought for her family and won. But justice, I learned, is not just about restitution. It's about respect. It's about acknowledgement. I sat down with Daniel one evening, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Ethan's laughter. He looked at me, his eyes full of regret. "Mom, I don't know how to make this right," he said. "I let her do this. I let her turn me against you. I let her hurt you, and I didn't even see it." I reached for his hand, my own trembling. "You can't change the past, Daniel, but you can choose what you do now. You can choose to see me, to respect me, to remember everything we've been through together." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I want to. I want to make it up to you. I want Ethan to know the kind of family we really are." We talked for hours, sifting through memories both painful and sweet. I told him about the nights I'd stayed up worrying, the sacrifices I'd made, the love that had never wavered. He listened, really listened, for the first time in years. And in that listening, I felt something shift, a bridge being rebuilt, plank by careful plank. Ethan, too, began to change. Without Olivia's constant criticism, he softened, returning to the affectionate, curious boy I remembered. He asked questions about our family, about the stories I used to tell, about the recipes we'd once made together. We baked cookies, planted flowers, and slowly, the warmth returned to our home. Olivia, meanwhile, faced the consequences of her actions. The court ordered her to pay restitution, and she was barred from accessing any of the family's finances. She moved out of town, her pride shattered, her future uncertain. I felt no triumph in her downfall, only a quiet sense of closure, a certainty that the cycle of cruelty had finally been broken. But the greatest victory was not in the legal documents or the returned money. It was in the way Daniel looked at me, the way Ethan hugged me, the way I felt when I walked through my own front door. I had reclaimed my dignity, my place in the family, my sense of self-worth. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer afraid. Is forgiveness possible after such betrayal? I asked myself that question every day. Some wounds heal slowly, and some scars never fully fade. But I chose to forgive, not for Olivia's sake, but for my own. I forgave Daniel for his blindness, Ethan for his mimicry, and even Olivia for her cruelty. Forgiveness, I learned, is not about forgetting. It's about letting go of the power the past holds over you. How would you rebuild after losing trust? For me, it was one small act at a time. A shared meal, a kind word, a moment of laughter. It was in the decision to open my heart again, to risk being hurt, to believe that love could survive even the deepest wounds. As the dust settled, I looked around at the life I had reclaimed. I saw the strength in my own reflection, the resilience in my son's eyes, the hope in my grandson's smile. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear. But I also knew that I was ready. I had faced the worst and come through it stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to protect what mattered most. And as I sat on the porch, one evening, watching the sun set over the garden I'd planted with my own hands, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The world was still imperfect, still full of uncertainty, but I was no longer a bystander in my own story. I was the author, the survivor, the matriarch, and I would never let anyone erase me again. The dust had settled, but the lessons remained. I had lost some things, illusions, trust, the easy comfort of believing the best in everyone, but I had gained so much more: dignity, self-respect, and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments I could find my way back to the light. As the stars appeared in the evening sky, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the strength to fight, for the courage to forgive, and for the chance to begin again. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, painful dream. The house was quieter, but the silence was no longer heavy with dread. Olivia's absence left a space that was, at first, raw and strange, but soon filled with something gentler, relief, and the slow return of hope. She had left town, her reputation in tatters, her circle of friends shrinking to nothing. I heard through the grapevine that she was living with a distant cousin, working a job far beneath the life she'd once flaunted. There was no satisfaction in her downfall, only a sense of justice finally served. Daniel, for his part, was a man changed. The guilt weighed on him, but so did a new humility. He called me every day, sometimes just to ask how my garden was growing, sometimes to apologize again for not seeing the truth sooner. He moved into a small apartment not far from my house, and on Sundays he joined me for dinner, bringing Ethan and a bouquet of flowers. We talked more than we had in years, about the past, about the future, about the things we'd lost and the things we still had. There were awkward silences, moments when the old wounds ached, but there was also laughter, forgiveness, and the slow, careful rebuilding of trust. Ethan, too, began to change. Without Olivia's constant criticism, he softened, returning to the affectionate, curious boy I remembered. He asked questions about our family, about the stories I used to tell, about the recipes we'd once made together. We baked cookies, planted flowers, and slowly, the warmth returned to our home. I saw him begin to understand that love wasn't measured in gifts or approval, but in the quiet, everyday acts of care and kindness. I found myself reconnecting with the world in ways I hadn't expected. The women from church brought casseroles and hugs, their kindness a balm for old wounds. Linda became a dear friend, her strength and compassion a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are people willing to stand beside you. I started volunteering at the local library, offering comfort to families waiting for news, sharing my story with those who needed hope. My days filled with small joys, tending my garden, baking bread, reading in the quiet afternoons. I learned to savor the simple things, the warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of Ethan's laughter, the peace that came from knowing I had done everything I could. I no longer felt invisible. I no longer doubted my worth. Looking back, I realized how much I had learned, not just about betrayal and justice, but about myself. I learned that trust is precious, that it must be given carefully and never taken for granted. I learned that resilience isn't about never breaking, but about finding the strength to put yourself back together, piece by piece. I learned that self-worth doesn't come from the approval of others, but from the quiet certainty that you are enough, just as you are. Most of all, I learned that love endures. It survives heartbreak, disappointment, even betrayal. It is the thread that binds us to each other, the light that guides us home. I had fought for my son, for my family, for my place in the world, and I had won. Not because I was fearless, but because I refused to give up. Would you have the strength to start over? What would you do if you were in my shoes? These questions echoed in my mind as I moved through my days, each one a reminder that life is never as simple as we hope, but always richer than we fear. I returned to my routines with a new sense of purpose. I baked bread for the church, taught Sunday school to the children, and volunteered at the food pantry that had once helped me. I found joy in small things, a letter from an old friend, the laughter of children playing outside, the scent of jasmine on the evening breeze. I realized that happiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you choose every day in 100 small ways. As the seasons changed, so did I. I let go of old hurts, made room for new beginnings, and opened my heart to the possibility of joy. I was no longer just a widow or a mother or a victim. I was a woman who had faced the worst and found in the end that she was more than enough. And as I sat on my porch one quiet evening, watching the sunset behind the old oak tree, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The world was still imperfect, still full of challenges and heartache, but I knew now that I could face whatever came next. I had learned to trust myself, to stand up for what was right, and to believe that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come. Now, as I look back on all that's happened, I wonder, what would you do if you were in my place? If you've listened to my story this far, I want to thank you for sharing this journey with me. I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt betrayed by someone they trusted or doubted their own worth when the world tried to convince them they were invisible. Maybe you've been in my shoes. Maybe you've faced a moment when the people you loved most let you down, and you had to find the strength to stand up for yourself, even when your voice trembled. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you love? What did you do? Did you find the courage to speak your truth? Or did you carry the weight in silence, hoping things would change? I'd love to hear your story. Your comment could help someone else find their voice, or give comfort to someone who's still searching for answers. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone is enough to make all the difference. If you were in my place, would you have fought for the truth, even if it meant risking your family? Would you have forgiven, or would you have walked away? There's no right or wrong answer, only the path that feels true to your heart. I hope you'll share your thoughts below, because every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. If this story touched you, please consider liking and sharing it so others can find hope and strength in these words. And if you want to hear more stories of justice, redemption, and the quiet power of ordinary people, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more journeys to share, stories of mothers and daughters, of second chances, of finding light in the darkest places. Thank you for being part of this community, for listening, for caring, and for reminding me and each other that we are never truly alone. Until next time, take care of your heart, trust your instincts, and remember, even when the world tries to silence you, your truth matters. And if you're still watching, I'd love to know, what would you do if you were in my place? Would you have the strength to start over, to fight for justice, to forgive? Or would you have chosen a different path? Your story could be the one that inspires someone else to find their own courage. So please, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation going. Because together, we can create a space where every voice is valued, every story is honored, and every heart finds a little more hope. And if you're ready for more stories of justice and redemption, don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more to come, and I can't wait to share it with you.